Welcome, Susan. I'm so glad to have you. And the conversation that we were just having, after that, I just feel like I should give you the floor and please share your journey, your life experiences. And the first question that I generally ask to all of my guests is, what movement are you building, Susan? Let us know.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I am building a movement to normalize grief because we don't talk about it. And so we don't have any skills around it. And we're not sharing what we know about it. So that makes it something that's really scary and something that really isolates us instead of building connection. So I come to this movement and I come to my work as a grief educator as a grieving mom. I had a death of my son, Ben, in September of 2020. He was 22, and that loss was, as you would expect and might be able to imagine if you're a parent, exactly as devastating and disorienting and confusing and disrupting as you would expect it to be. And what I really came to see really quickly was that I didn't know enough about grief, and I had had other deaths close to me. My dad died when I was in my early 30s, when Ben was a baby, actually, so 22 years before Ben died, and my mom when I was in my 40s. So it wasn't the first close loss to me. But there was something about this one that just was sort of grief next level, if you will.
I
And what
can
I
understand.
came to see, yeah, as you would expect, right? I don't know why
Yes.
I didn't expect that, but I didn't really. And what I came to see was that, people didn't know how to show up to support me. I didn't know really how to grieve. Like and there isn't a rule book and there shouldn't be a rule book because it's so individual for each of us and it's individual each time we have a loss. But there are some common symptoms, there are some common experiences that I think if we were talking about them and sharing about them, wouldn't be so scary and wouldn't be so isolating. And grievers wouldn't be left feeling like there was something wrong with them. And people who
Sure.
wanted to support them wouldn't be scared by what they saw happening to their friend or acquaintance or colleague. So, as with everything, right? Information is power. Information is what allows us to, deal with things better. And, it's really hard with languaging around grief. I hate to talk about sort of better and worse, but I really do think when we're showing up for people, we can do much, much better. And
Right.
so that's kind of become my mission. And that's the movement I'm trying to create is, where do we open up conversations? How can we talk about it even ahead of time? How can we support people with small losses? Because someone like me who's choosing to grieve out loud and lost a child is probably not a good first assignment, right? You're
Yes.
not
Yes.
going to, without knowing how
Completely.
to ride a bike, go do the Tour de France, right? So,
Yes.
if you are not comfortable with grief, I am not your first person to help, probably. But
Definitely.
we all
Definitely.
have losses throughout our lives of people, of experiences, of opportunities, of marriages, of, so many things. The list goes on and on and on. And that's a beautiful spot for us to practice. That's a beautiful spot for us to build skills, to get comfortable with our emotions, to get comfortable with vulnerability, to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because
Yes.
that's what a movement is about ultimately. If we're trying to start a movement, it's about us collectively getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Definitely. Uh, Susan, once I actually, went through your work, I realized something, and I thought about my past when I
Mm,
was working in corporate, and since last 5 years, I'm running my business. What I realized that if I knew how to handle this grief better, how to, you know, handle grief better for myself as well as people who are grieving around me, if I knew how to handle it better, I would have probably, made a really great impact in that person's life. But
Yes.
because I wasn't exposed to how to handle and how to, react when someone is going through grief, it just makes things worse for us, as well as the
Mm.
other person, because even they don't know how to accept your help, or what to do at that moment, and we have no clue how to help them. So I just wanted to ask you about this, how to handle situations like that. And let's just start with our own symptoms, when we are grieving, and what sort of, grief we all experience. It's not always about loss of someone. There are so
Hmm.
many different kinds of grief that we go through and we don't even realize about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
And
just
I think,
enlighten us about that.
yeah, and I think especially right now, we're 3 years post whenever COVID hit your life.
Yeah.
We all have had lots of losses. Many people have lost people, as I have, as I mean, the global loss of people was something we've never experienced before. We
Yes.
lost opportunities. We lost, somehow everybody was going on a vacation. I'm not sure why that spring everybody was going on vacation, and I'm still mad about that vacation I lost. And I think that's healthy. I'm still mad
Yeah.
about it. And we have all kinds of feelings about those things. It's so funny. I was talking to a woman, a month or so ago now, and we were talking about this idea of doing a loss inventory and thinking about the things you had lost, in the past 3 years. And the one that hit her that she hadn't thought about before was her youngest child was graduating from high school
Oh.
that September. So they lost, or that June. So they lost prom, they lost the graduation ceremonies, they lost all of that. And she realized that she had helped him because, of course, he was so upset about all of that. And that was so devastating for so many young people, those big milestone events they didn't get to have the way they had dreamed. But she realized she hadn't allowed herself to feel her disappointment. This was her youngest child, so this was like her last chance to do it up right, and have this big celebration. She's in the States where it's, graduation from high school is a really big deal. And she was like, I had not even thought about how for her as the mom who was going through this for the last time and had all this vision of how it was going to be this time, she was going to, make up for all the past things she hadn't done.
Yeah.
And she didn't get to do that. So it's those kind of things that I think we're not acknowledging, and we're not allowing the emotions that that brings up to just be felt. And really, that's the first thing. So if you're someone who's grieving, my suggestion always is to just face it. We want so much to turn away. And I understand that instinct. I have lived that, instinct for self protection, for, you know, just being overwhelmed by the size of it, by the feelings, by the emotions, by the loneliness, by all of it. But really, the only way to heal it is to feel it, as they say. And those really hard emotions, those ones that we've been taught, we're taught as little kids, there's good emotions and bad emotions, which is it's such a harmful concept around emotions, especially for grievers, because in grief, what you're feeling is predominantly the ones on the list that we've been taught to stuff and to not express, and we're for sure not putting them on Instagram, right? We're for sure not
Yeah.
sharing them as part of our,
Yes.
curated, put together selves. But those are just as valid, and they have just as much to teach us, and they have just as much power, if not more, to connect us as all the positive ones that we're open about and we love to share, right? We want to share when we're joyous. We want to share when we're grateful. We want to share when we're happy. And there's all these other emotions that have just as much richness for us if we can turn to face them and allow them to flow. And, sometimes they come out our eyes as water, and that's okay. And sometimes, they mean we're curled up in a ball on the sofa, and that's okay. All of it is all right. And if we talk about, how it works for each of us, because it's so different, we would see commonalities around things like brain fog, where your brain is just foggy. It's busy reprogramming itself. I'm learning so much more about, what the brain is actually doing during that time of fogginess. It's reprogramming all those tracks. So when I think to myself, oh, I should tell Ben that message gets in my brain to a certain point and then fritzes against the information in my brain that Ben is no longer available for me to tell. And then it needs to lay a
Yeah.
new pathway. So your
Yes.
brain is like literally reprogramming itself. Thank goodness for neuroplasticity. Your brain is busy reprogramming itself. That's why it's busy. It's also protecting you, I think, a little bit from the overwhelm and the shock and all of that. So we have a lot of brain fog. Many people experience digestive issues, muscular issues, sleep for sure, sleeping and eating, all those things that, weren't for most of us weren't that hard, become super challenging. And then just all the normal things that we do without really thinking, for me, this time around meant I had to think about them, like having a shower. I would end up standing under the water and think, like, where am I and how did I get here? And then, this activity that I had done for, 55 years quite successfully, well, maybe 50, probably the first 5 I had some help, but, for a long time, I had not even had to think about it. And I have
Yeah.
always thought, we have our best ideas, I believe, in the shower because our brain is free to think creatively because it's not having to think
Right.
about, cleaning
Anything else?
itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But in this round with grief, I had to stand there and think, okay, did I wash my hair yet? Like, I think I did, but I don't know. So I better shampoo first and then his conditioner. And then I had to talk myself through like, okay. And then we put the, shower gel on the foamy, on the fluffy thing, and you got to do arms and then legs in whatever order you do yourself. It
Oh
really
my
took
God. Oh
like
my God.
conscious thought to go, okay. And like, did I get it all? I think so. I don't know. Like, so for me, it was that level of brain fog. It was that extreme. And my daughter tells a hilarious story of us deciding one day we could feed ourselves because it took us a long time to be able to feed ourselves. I still don't do a very good job of it, 2.5 years later. And she tells a hilarious story of us making a grilled cheese sandwich, which for most of us, that's your like easy, lazy night meal, right? Or lazy lunch, whatever it is. It took us 45 minutes to make a grilled cheese sandwich because
Oh my
our
God.
sense of, and if you break it down, it's actually quite complicated. I give myself a lot of grace. You have to find the fry pan, you have to put it on the stove, you have to put the element on, you got to find the bread and the mayo and the cheese or whatever it is you put in your grilled cheese sandwich. You have to assemble all of those things in a particular order. It only works if the order is right, right? Like if you think about it, it's really complicated.
Oh
But it's
God.
that level of things that you really, for me, I had to break down and think, like, how do we do this? So and that's when I thought there is something wrong with me. Like, what is going on that I just can't do normal,
Things.
simple
Normal
tasks?
things. Yeah.
Normal, simple
Yeah.
tasks are almost impossible. And, of course, as I found community online and as I found other grief experts who were sharing their expertise before I had any of my own, I learned that everything I was experiencing was absolutely normal and expected. But no one had ever told me about it. I bet you when my dad died, my mom had very similar experiences. Because now in hindsight, I look at how she was especially those early days after he died and in the aftermath of that. And I think, oh, now I get it. Like she did kind of lose her mind for a little while. And that's should have been expected. But she never talked about it because I bet no one told her.
No
So
one talks
she
about
thought there
it.
was something wrong with her and so didn't want to say to us, oh, and by the way, I know you're grieving your dad, but I have also lost my mind, right? That's a weird conversation to have unless we're all talking about it. And then it's okay.
Unless it's a normal situation in every home where we are talking about our happiness, and at the same time we are also talking about the things that we are grieving about. What are the other symptoms, Susan, that people maybe they haven't gone through as big a loss that you went through? I think the one thing that you mentioned just now is to know that you're grieving. How to
Yeah.
know that we're grieving? At times, I think we don't even know that we are grieving about something.
Yes, that's so true. And
You
one of the
lost your
things,
son. So you lost your son. That's an obvious, such a big loss
yeah.
in life, and you know that you're grieving.
Mhm.
And it's expected that You will grieve, and you will grieve for a longer time. But what about if we don't even understand that we're grieving, and our behavioral patterns and the way we show up in the world, the way we show up for ourselves, is not exactly the way it should be because we're not aware of it. We don't know that we're grieving. How to acknowledge that?
I think that's so brilliant of you to say, because I think that's what we're seeing happening right now. We are
Yeah.
all in deep grief. We have layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of losses and things that need to be grieved, emotions that need to be felt and moved and processed, and we're not doing it. And I think that's part of why we're seeing people lashing out in a way that feels scary and dangerous and worrisome. And grief is very patient, and grief will wait for you, but it will not go away. So, that was part of what I knew too. I needed to face this full on and have as much of it, as big of it as was coming at the beginning, where, as you say, as a mother who lost a child, everyone expected me to be grieving and gave me space to be grieving and assumed at work I would be a hot mess, right? And I would need help. So I was really conscious of that too, that like this was my moment to get support and I better like take advantage, not in an unhealthy way, but like there was going to be robust support and expectation of how I might be coping. And that gave me some permission that often we don't have. So what I would say to people who feel like, they just feel a little bit off, or they're feeling some of that brain fog, or they're feeling a little bit numb. Sometimes it shows up as numbness. One of the things for me that I really found with grief is I really struggle, and still do to an extent, but in the early days, and when I talk about early days, I'm talking about the first 2 years, so much longer than we're taught. About the first 2 years, I really struggled with sequential tasking. So if you think about something like making a grilled cheese sandwich, there's a number of steps that you have to do in a certain order to get the result that you want. If you find that you're struggling with that kind of thing that used to be easy and now feels hard, it's a great time to do a loss inventory and to just think about, just find a quiet space, play some quiet music, whatever allows you to connect with yourself. And we all have different methods. Some of us want to go be in nature. Some of us need a quiet corner. You might need some soothing music. You might need thrash metal. I don't know, whatever it is that helps you connect with yourself. And just do that loss inventory and think about, beyond people, beyond, individuals in our life that we've lost, or individuals we've seen other people experience grief about, to look at the other losses. So when we're talking especially about businesses, what
Yeah.
opportunities did you lose, right? What offer, especially as women entrepreneurs, we put so much of ourselves into every offer that we make. So what offer did you create with care and skill and compassion and think was going to be the thing that served the needs of
Yes.
your clients, and you launched it and got crickets? Nothing happened. Nobody replied. That's
Yeah. And
something
that
you
takes
need
a
to
toll.
grieve. Absolutely. And that's a loss you need to grieve, because it's the loss of the story you had told yourself about what the potential was. And that potential is all still there. We know that. This just wasn't the path to get to it. So you have to, regroup, harvest and compost, look at what you learned, all of that in our iterative process of creating as female entrepreneurs. That's how we operate. We're trying to step away from that linear, push energy, most of us, and that brings that iterative process. But an iterative process also assumes imperfection. It
Yes.
assumes not everything is going to be brilliantly successful the first time we try it, right? It assumes, that our first offer, when we look back on it, will be a little bit embarrassed by. Like that's when we should be launching, when we're a little bit embarrassed by our product. We're not waiting for perfection, right? But if we're
Yes.
going to dance on that growth edge and, claim and really own what's ours to claim and own, that also brings higher risk of a little bit of failure. And so
Yes.
if we're going to do that, then we need to grieve those fails and
And it should be a
expect.
normal process, right? Because
Yeah.
as you know, my most of my audience is entrepreneur women who are either entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs. And
Mhm.
entrepreneurial journey is all about setbacks. There's just so
Absolutely.
many setbacks we go through, and there are just so many ways we feel disappointed at times, and we have no clue how to deal with that. And
Yeah. And we're
and
told
we
as
also
women,
work.
especially, we should just smile, right? Why aren't you
Yeah,
smiling? Well,
yeah.
because I'm mad because I put a lot of time and energy into this launch and it didn't go the way I wanted. And I'm okay with being mad about that. And I can be
And especially
disappointed.
with social media, you just
Yeah.
feel like, it's just not normal to fail at times. It's just not normal to lose certain things, your dreams, your aspirations, whatever it is that you thought should work in a certain way. And if it doesn't work, and we are unable to deal with it because we have no clue how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love to do a loss inventory. I think it's so powerful. And for most people, they end up with a whole bunch of things on there that they didn't expect, which is brilliant because the more we can see them, and so that's step one. And then you need to allow those feelings, right? So then you need some skills around connecting with yourself, with your feelings, and allowing them to be okay and allowing them to be messages, to be information, and really to expand beyond that sort of mad, sad, glad paradigm and languaging to really dig to the nuance of what is this really about? What's the underlying feeling really? Like I might be feeling mad about it, but really, anger is not the real emotion, right? Anger is the first layer, right? And what's
Yeah.
really under it is probably fear, is probably a little bit of shame for women, especially. We go to shame
Yes.
based meaning making way
Yeah.
like
Because we want to do
exponentially more than
everything
men do,
perfectly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we go to shame based meaning making. And once you're in shame, you can't learn. There's no learning in shame. So we also have to learn how to recognize when we're feeling that shame and go, oh, but that there's nothing healthy for me there. So I have to disrupt that then. You have to disrupt that shame, feel it, allow it, all of that. We don't want to ever be stuffing anything because we know, research now bears out all the information we've been hearing from, visionary medical people for now at least a decade, if not two, that all that unexpressed emotion and trauma, that's part of what turns malignant in our bodies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they
So
pile
we
up.
need, yeah, so we need to not be stuffing anything. If you need to scream into a pillow, if you need to go to a smash room, I was listening to a podcast with David Kessler the other day, who's where I did my grief educator training. He's a brilliant grief expert. And he has a baseball bat by his bed. And when he feels that emotional overwhelm, because he also knows that you need to move, like emotions need to be moved. There's a reason the word motion is in there. We need to move them. And he gets out his baseball bat and he beats up his bed. And that's what he does because he just has to, he's like, I just whack
It's
that
his
bed,
way.
right? Because he has to have that way to physicalize and move that energy, right? So finding a way to do that, I love walking. Like I do that work. I have a great exercise that I learned from my brilliant mentor and trainer, Dr. Claire Zammit. And she does a feelings and needs exercise. So, which I'm happy to share with your audience. It's a great exercise for women. So you do that loss inventory when you want to dig into the feelings that are underlying now, that are all bubbling, right? Because now you've looked at the losses and you're like, oh, what do I do now? I don't know what to do now. So now we need to access those feelings and we need to take good care of ourselves. So it's a super simple exercise. It's completely internal. So you don't have to do it out loud. You don't have to share it with anybody. And you're having a conversation with yourself, which is such a brilliant way for us as women to access our own wisdom. So you're having a conversation with yourself and you ask yourself, I would say to myself, Suzanne, how do you feel? What do you feel? And then you
Okay.
wait quietly for the answer. So right now, I feel invigorated. And so you just respond back. You just reflect back. I hear that you feel invigorated. And then you ask again, Suzanne, how are you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling so grateful. Oh, I can hear you're feeling grateful. And you do that 3 times. So a third time, Suzanne, how are you feeling? And reflect back. And the fourth question is, Suzanne, what do you need? Because if we can link our feelings to what they're telling us about what we need, that's where the magic is. That's where we can
Oh
really
God.
connect with ourselves, right? and
Yeah.
really start to take care of ourselves and what we need. And those feelings and emotions are the path to that knowledge, right? That's our path to connecting with our own inner wisdom, which,
Yeah.
especially as, I like to say we're fempreneurs, right? We're women ready to take on the world and create a
Yes.
movement, right? We need to be so in touch with ourselves, and we need to be so self-compassionate, and we need to be self-leaders, and we need so many skills with ourselves.
And
And
this
for
is
me,
such a simple exercise where
yeah,
you just, internalize the whole process. Ask yourself how you're feeling, and then ask yourself what you need. And when you
yeah,
are aware of what you need and how you're feeling, you can have a better conversation with the other people as well. And you know what to expect out of yourself and from the others.
yeah. And if we want to get comfortable supporting people who are grieving, who have huge emotions, we have to be comfortable with our own. We have
Yes.
to have a level of comfort with emotions in ourselves. First of all, to be able to self regulate and just be able to hold and help them hold all the emotions they're experiencing, right? Because a burden shared is a burden lightened. And if we want to be able to show up for people, we have to be able to show up for ourselves. So if we
Yes.
can't even have a conversation with ourselves quietly in ourselves about feelings and emotions, it's really hard to show up for someone else who's in big emotion. Especially like if it was someone
Yeah.
like me grieving out loud, man, I know I was like a thundercloud coming for you. And so if you have no emotional intelligence or agility or no connection to your own emotions, I'm sure I was terrifying. I must have been. I could only have been terrifying.
Yeah. And there is one more thing when I got to know about your work, I understood that you talk about how we can approach people when they're grieving and how can we truly help them, not
Mhm.
just, asking them the question, how can I help you?
Yeah.
You know,
Anything you
and
need,
when,
I'm there for you.
yeah,
Just let me
anything you need,
know.
just let me know.
Yeah.
And you don't know at that moment what you need. And if you would probably take care of it. So,
Yeah.
how to deal in that situation? And I also want you to relate this in context with women who are aspiring to launch their businesses, who are aspiring, or women who are into business and they are struggling because, we all are human and we have our own baggage, we have our own personal experiences. And at the same time, we are also trying to build a business for ourselves. So
Mhm.
how should we approach people when they're grieving?
So there's kind of two facets to this aspect of supporting each other. One is about what we can say. So we need to start there because if you can't say anything, you can't offer to help, right?
Yes.
So we know somehow we have this collective knowing that all of the things we've heard in the past, all those old cliches and platitudes, no longer serve. They feel weird coming out of our mouths. We know that much. We seem to, but we haven't replaced them with anything. And I think that's because there's no one right thing. I mean, I could make a bajillion zillion dollars if I could come up with that one right thing and market, here's the one right thing, but there isn't one. So, what we need to do to first be able to say something is get really centered in our heart, get really honest with what we're feeling. So, that's why we start there, right? How we deal with our own emotions is critical to this, movement starting. So, how do we get into our heart and how do we speak from there? So, for me, I'm in North America. Everything here, we are excellent from the neck up. We are so good in our head, in our body. We barely know it's there, right? So, we first need to connect there. If we're heart centered and we're speaking genuinely and vulnerably from the heart, I believe we can do no harm. And that's everyone's fear, right?
Yeah.
99% of the people who I've ever asked this question to, and it's been a lot of people at this point, why didn't you show up? Why don't you show up? What holds you back when you're facing someone who's grieving? It's fear. That's almost universal.
Yeah.
And the fear is that we will do harm, that we will hurt them, we will make it worse.
Yeah.
We know we can't fix it, but we don't want to
Yeah.
make it worse.
Yes.
If you're speaking from the heart and you're genuinely saying what you have to say to that individual, that's where the gold is. And it's going to be different every time because the person that you're speaking to, you have a different relationship with them, especially when we're talking about entrepreneurs. If it's a work colleague, if it's an
Yeah.
employee on your team, if it's a customer, you're going to have very different things to say to all of those people, right? A power partner versus an employee versus a customer, that's at least three different things you have to have some kind of access to saying. And every time I do this exercise with people in workshops, and I do an exercise where I get people to craft their own right thing to say, so that, and your listeners can do this too. This is a great way to start this thought process. So if you think back, as you were saying, now as you're building your skill set and you're seeing where your gaps are, and you're looking back and going, oh, if only I had, right? So think back to someone who you maybe didn't support the way you wished you had, and think about what you wish you had said to them, and
Yeah.
just drop right into your heart and speak to them from there. And pretty, the things people come up with, we all end up in tears because the things people come up with are so beautiful. And that's where we start to build connection, because if I'm speaking from my heart to your heart, that's where our connection is. We're not connected. Our connections intellectually are a whole different thing. And they don't necessarily help us in grief at all. In fact, I don't think they help us at all. We have to
Yeah.
connect a different way because, I can have all the skills in the world, but I can't come and tell you what to do because it's your grief. It's yours. You own it. I don't get to tell you how to do it,
Yeah.
but I can come and say, oh my gosh, what's happened is so terrible. And I'm so sorry you're going through this. And I don't know what you're going to need. And I don't know how long you're going to need it, but I'm going to keep offering until you tell me to stop. And I'm going to be here for you for whatever it takes, however long it takes. I am here. What
Giving
if we
them the
said something
time.
like that?
Yeah,
Right?
giving them the time to actually figure out
Yeah.
things for themselves.
Yeah. And so that's sort of how to approach what to say. And then when you've started that conversation, and then you've done the hardest part, right? Because the
Yeah.
part that for most of us is easier is the practical support. So what can you do? Like, what are really practical things you can do for that person?
Those specific requirements they might
Yes.
have.
Yeah. And so there, we're all, we want to help. We genuinely want to help. And so we say things like, anything you need, let me know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me know if you need anything. What do you need? But it's all general, and that's too big. So for grievers, when
And
you're in
you're
that
telling
brain
that
fog,
there is brain fog, right?
yeah,
So
I
when
don't
you
know
generalize it,
anything. It's too
yeah.
much. So really specific offers are the most helpful. So I'm going to the grocery store. Do you need bread?
Oh,
Right?
yes.
No, I don't need bread, but could you get me some bananas or apples or cheese or whatever it is? I'm going to the
Yes.
grocery store. Go stand in your fridge and tell me what's missing, and I'll bring it to you this afternoon.
Right. We need
Right?
to understand that there is brain fog right now. There are
Yeah.
different, the person is not in their perfect, condition
No.
mentally and physically. So we need to be specific. And same thing we can do with ourselves when we are working with other people in our business
Yes.
or wherever we are working. And we can be specific. Oh God, if I knew this when I was in corporate, uh, I would have handled things so much better. I was always very compassionate, but
Mhm.
I didn't know the right thing, right question to ask them.
Yeah. And I think when we're talking about a corporate environment or a work environment, what I suggest when I'm working with businesses and what we craft together is almost like a menu. So
Yeah.
depending on your business, you may have teams that work on, projects. You have project-based teams. So then
Yeah.
how can you, if you think about how people are now struggling maybe with multi-step tasks, how can you break those out? How can you
Oh,
document? How can you have
yes.
shared calendars, right? So that the person isn't having to think, oh my gosh, is there a meeting today? I can't remember. Did I write it down somewhere? I don't know. You just go to the shared calendar and there it
Yes.
all is. The due dates are there, the deliverables are there, the steps are there. especially with technology right now, it's so easy for us to document all of those things. And that helps the whole team. Like, let's be honest, that's going to help everybody. So we're doing it specifically to help a griever. That's our initial thought is, how do we help this person who's really needs our support? And we have as a valuable part of our team. And we want them at work being as successful as they can be. And for a lot of grievers, work is the place they go almost for a respite from their grief, almost for a break from it. And it's a place where you get to kind of have contact with the normal world. So your world feels like a post-apocalyptic nightmare. And in parallel with that is this normal world that keeps going. So work is a place you get to interact with that and figure out how to do that, first of all, because it's really complicated for a lot of people. And if we can scaffold some of those really kind of simple things, then it creates space for people to be able
Yeah.
to have all their emotions and
Yeah.
be successful at work,
Be
right?
successful at work. Yeah.
Yeah, people
And there
maybe
are
need a
one more.
quiet place to go.
Yeah, and there is one more thing, Susan. While you were talking, I just realized that a lot of us female entrepreneurs, we are doing it all alone. We don't
Hmm.
have team. And
Yep.
what if we are the one who are grieving and we also have to build the business? We are the ones who are feeling the loss of something, whether someone in our life or losses in the business. How can we handle ourselves and take care of ourselves better and still make the difference?
You know what? Hi, welcome to my life.
Oh yeah, you
Right?
yourself
That's
just have
exactly
done
what I'm
it.
doing. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. So the best way for me to think about it is, and the way that I have kind of managed doing those things concurrently is a bunch of skills and a bunch of support. And I think really, the thing we need to understand as female entrepreneurs is we're not supposed to be doing this by ourselves. So if you feel like you're doing this by yourself, you need to find some power partners, and you need to find them fast, because none of us should be doing this by ourselves. We need to
Yeah.
be uplifting each other. So find some power partners. That's step one. For me, really, like this magic box that we all have in our pocket, bless this magic box, right? So I started keeping to-do lists, and because I also needed to get things out of the spin in my head, because my head was spinning and I couldn't grab things and remember them. My memory is a huge thing that gets disrupted. Memory and your relationship to time are things that really impact us in the workplace as well, and especially as entrepreneurs. So for me, the documenting of the to-do list became critical, and I didn't put it in any kind of order. And my rule for myself is I kind of look at the list and I go, okay, what's either like now become urgent because I've not gotten to it. So you have to deal with those urgent things, whether you want to or not, unfortunately, whether you feel capable or not. Sometimes you just got to like suck it up, buttercup, which is not a good long-term strategy, but short-term, sometimes we just got to do that. And then otherwise, what I try to do is look at the list and think, okay, what do I feel like I could do really well right in this moment? Because it's going to change 10 minutes from now. It's going to change a moment from now. An hour from now, I'll be in a totally different space. So what's on that list that I could do now? So a lot of the time, in especially the early days, it was either what's easy, so what's a quick, easy win, or what will get the spin out of my head. Because I really felt like that spin was really disorienting for me. I had never had that as a part of how I operated. So that was disorienting. So it was what's either an easy win with whether it had a big payoff or a little payoff, didn't matter. What's an easy
Yeah.
win? So we start to build momentum.
Yeah.
And then what will help the spin get out of my head? So for me, it was a lot of writing. I did a lot of writing to just get that spin out of my head. And then I could focus for a period of time. And I think, one of the gifts that we get to have as a fempreneur who also creates our own schedule is you can work whenever. So when
Okay.
I would have a bad afternoon or a bad hour, that was okay because I could work a little bit
Yeah.
later that day, or I could go, you know what, today's a write off. So that means on Saturday or Sunday or whatever days I have off, that I try and give myself off, which we know as entrepreneurs, you don't really ever get
We
a total
don't
day off,
really,
but
yeah.
we like to at least have a bit of a, distancing perhaps from work ish. That means on those days I have to more consciously actually get some work done. Like I need to pick up this time someplace else.
So it should be
That,
okay for us to not adhere to the to-do list.
yep,
Go with the flow for the time being. You are not in control, and build yourself in the process. And it should be okay for us to not be able to accomplish certain things that we thought we should in certain time frame, and and keep our momentum as we move forward, and do not pressurize ourselves for certain
yep.
things.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah. And I'm all about baby steps. Like I jokingly
Mhm.
say, like I'm going to baby step my way to like global domination, but I'm going to have got there in baby steps because
Yeah.
we can't, you can't, especially in grief in those early days, that I mean, that acute phase when you're just a hot mess,
Yeah.
whatever you need to do to keep your head above water and keep fiscally sound to be able to pay your bills, that's it. Just do that.
That's it. Yeah. I
Don't
give
launch
yourself
anything
your
new.
space.
Don't
Yeah.
try and create anything. Like just create space for yourself. That's your creative project, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would pull back from like I didn't launch anything. I couldn't. It wasn't possible. So whatever you can do to just stay fiscally sound, keep your head above water, that's the whole to-do list. That's it. And then as time goes on and you start to gain capacities again, then it's time to start looking at, okay, but what can I pivot? And, your priorities might shift. Your
Yeah.
identity might shift. Like I am not the person who went to bed the night before I got that middle of the night phone call.
Yeah.
That woman doesn't exist anymore. So
Yes.
those early days, you're rebuilding yourself. So to try and do that and expand a business, that's not necessarily a good time for expansion. Find those
Yes.
power partners that can help you hold possibility, that can help you hold your intentions, and just go with the flow. It's so much about the flow. And really, you know, I've had so much learning and so much, growth that I didn't need or want at the
Yeah.
price I paid for it, right? And I don't believe that things happen for a
But
reason,
you
but I
made the choice that it's not what happened to you is going to, uh, you know, decide what your life's going to look like. You made that
yeah,
choice that
yeah,
you will have a say in how it looks, after Ben, how my life
yeah,
looks after Ben.
yeah,
And that's really powerful, though you took a lot of time, 2 to 3 years now, 2.5 years.
yeah,
And and you're a good example for all of us in the business that it's okay to take time,
yes.
and it's okay to be sad, and at the same time fight for the life that you think that you can create after what has happened to you.
Yep. And I think that we receive from clients, customers, business partners, there is so much grace out there for us if we will just give ourselves permission to ask for it.
Ask for it.
If we give ourselves permission to be vulnerable, to say, oh my gosh, I've had this catastrophic loss. If you're in the middle of a project and something catastrophic happens,
Yeah.
why would you pretend nothing has happened?
Right.
That makes no sense. And if we're honest with people, if we're, anytime I see someone just speaking their truth and being honest, then we're all there for them, right?
Yes. Yes.
None of us are perfect, and perfect is a construct anyway. It doesn't exist.
It
So
doesn't
we're
exist.
going to no longer aspire to that. That'll be another movement that we're all going to co-create together, right? Enough of that. We can all be recovering perfectionists together.
Yeah, I am one.
Yeah. But our power is in our vulnerability. Our power is in our honesty. And if,
Yes.
I
Yes.
have to say to people, I can't do that. I can no longer do what I said I would do. So where do we go from here? And then you have
Yeah.
that conversation. Where do we
Yeah.
go from here? Maybe we take a pause on our partnership. Maybe there's other people that can step up and take on pieces that were supposed to be mine that now need to be someone else's, and I can take a step back for a while. If you can afford to, saying to your clients, I'm going to be off for a month. I'm going to be
Yeah.
off for a week. I'm, some time where you can completely disconnect is brilliant. And I understand that for many entrepreneurs is a huge ask, right?
Yeah.
Financially, they can't afford it. They can't afford to lose that momentum. So I totally get that. If that's not possible for
Yeah.
you, don't do it, right?
Yeah. But
But
then we
but
have
we
to look
need to
at the
think
bigger, long term
creatively.
gain. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to think creatively about how do we support ourselves.
Mm.
It goes back to that old, saying where and I remember it from when my kids were tiny, tiny, and people were starting to talk about, you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. You
Yep.
can't help them until you are resourced. So
Right.
whatever you need to do to resource yourself first, then we can give to others. But we can't give if we're not resourced. And when you're in those early days of grief, holy cow, it's taking everything you have to just hold it together and just get through the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And Susan, you know, we had this beautiful conversation, and now before we close this, session that we're having, and I just don't feel like doing that, but then if you have to summarize the whole conversation that we just had, we talked about normalizing grief. We talked
Mhm.
about brain fog. We talked about symptoms that could be unique to you and understanding that it is okay in the moment to be going through all of that. And then understanding, how can we help ourselves? How can we acknowledge what we are going through and then what we actually need at this moment? If I have to ask you, if you can summarize it for my listeners, how can they step by step go through the process and create that space for themselves over the time where they can be grieving but they are
Mhm.
still productive and growing.
For me, it's about radical acceptance, not of the thing that has happened. That's a different conversation, but acceptance of what is happening to you. So I got the knowing very early on that I had to be two things to survive this loss. I had to be conscious, which meant I had to stay awake for all of it. I couldn't stuff any of it. I couldn't turn away. I couldn't ignore it. I just had to let it all come and like eyes wide open courage. I just had to face it. That was the conscious piece. I couldn't stuff it. I couldn't
Yes.
like shut it off. And the thing that went with that, which I think allowed the growth to continue, was that curiosity. If you can hold that growth mindset, and really in the early days, the curiosity is about how do I breathe? Like literally, I'm curled
Yeah.
up in a ball on the couch, sobbing the ugly cry, that cry where you're going, because you can't even breathe.
Breathe.
How do I breathe? How do I breathe? That's my curiosity. How do I do this? And I had read this amazing book that actually had a tool about that. And so I was like, oh, wait, I listened to this podcast. I heard these women. Maybe I should try that. And it was brilliant and it worked like gangbusters. So pull out every tool in your toolbox. But it's that curiosity piece, I think, that keeps us being productive. It keeps us moving. It keeps us from getting stuck anywhere. Because if you can look into the face of something horrifying with curiosity, there's also a little glimmer of light, right? Curiosity brings a little glimmer of light. And I mean, gosh, at the beginning, that light was like a candle at the end of 1,000-mile tunnel, right? But it still was there. And I really believe it's that curiosity piece, that growth mindset that keeps us able to connect with our genius, our gifts, the movement we're here to create, right? Even in those darkest days, you can
Yes.
stay connected to like, but what is this about? How do I make sense of this? How do I integrate this into my life? How do I move forward with this loss? I'm not leaving Ben behind. I don't want to get over it. I never will be
Yeah.
over it. Why should I be? That's preposterous. So if I'm not going to get over it, if I've, if I've just dismissed that idea, then what? Then how do I move forward? How do I create a different relationship with him where we honor him in our lives? We talk about him in our lives. I welcome
Yeah.
opportunities to talk about him. It's that curiosity piece. So that would be, if I had any suggestion, it's those two things. Face
Yeah. So
it.
first, we need to acknowledge that what's happening is supposed to happen. There is nothing
Yes.
wrong with it. And the
No.
other aspect of it is that you are experiencing something, your experience, the loss and the grief and whatever it is that you never expected but has happened to you.
Yeah.
Now, how can you stay in a growth mindset and make a sense out of that in your life
Yeah.
and
While
use that
allowing all of those emotions, right? Allowing
emotions?
all
Yeah.
of that. So you're in overwhelm. Like, really, my curiosity would be about, like, I wonder how long I'm going to feel overwhelmed. I don't know. Isn't that interesting? I am completely overwhelmed. I am the hottest hot mess I have ever been in my life. And I wonder how long that's going to be for. Like, I wonder. But that allowed me to kind of keep moving and really baby steps, like a shuffle. Like this step of level of baby steps, like it was a shuffle. But it allowed me to kind of stay in that ability to, just be curious. Like, how long is it going to be till I feel comfortable in a grocery store? Grocery stores are a really hard place for grievers. If you own a grocery store, please reach out. I would love to help you fix that. It's a super hard place for grievers, and there's ways to fix it. But like, how long will like interesting? How long will it be till I can actually feed myself properly? I don't know. Can't do it today, so I'm just going to accept that today is not that day, and be curious
Right.
about when that might be.
Right.
No
And
blame, no judgment, no shame, just curiosity.
yeah, and I really liked. I was, watching you talk about your experience, and you said one thing that Ben is no more,
Yeah,
and that's the truth. But what happens when Ben is not there? I want to have a say in that with my
yeah,
life. So
yeah,
having that kind of mindset that it's okay to be in that position, but still having the mindset to keep unwrapping what's possible next for you.
yeah. And that comes with deep sadness. Like, it's interesting. I don't usually well up when we have this part of the conversation, but I'm welling up because I just think, and man, that sucks.
Yeah,
It just sucks that he's not here.
he's not here.
It sucks. And I want to have the richest, most abundant, most fulfilling, most wonderful life that I can create, even though he's not.
But it's in a way honoring him,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Oh God, this is so powerful. I had never thought, and the kind of upbringing I come from, I had never had a conversation with anyone around grief, and I had no clue how to deal with it. Thank you so much, Susan, and I'm sure all of my listeners and they would feel the same. You know, enlightening us and making us realize of your movement that talking and normalizing grief is something that we must start now, so that we handle it better, so that we can support people better. I love the movement that you're on, Susan, and thank you so much for taking out your time and showing up for my listeners. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the program. And I would like you to discuss about your program as well, so that if there is anybody amongst my listeners and they want to take help and they want to seek guidance around how to handle grief, they can reach out to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for giving me a moment to just speak to that. So I have two streams of programming. I work with grievers one-on-one
Okay.
because it's such an individual experience. And for me, I didn't want to sit in a room of people and try and
Yeah.
hold their grief too.
Not
I couldn't.
everyone is comfortable.
And
Yeah.
there's tons of amazing groups out there. And if that works for you, please go find a group. We need to grieve in community. Our grief needs to be witnessed. It's critical to the
Yeah.
process. So I work one-on-one with grievers, and just do a completely customized, whatever you need. How do I help
Yeah.
you hold this? How do I help you carry this?
Yes.
How do we start to take those baby steps? And then with businesses, I have a 6-step program. There we go. My tongue does usually work.
It's all
A
right. It's all
6-step
right.
program. Yeah. So we start with looking at emotions and how we acknowledge those at work or don't, and starting to disrupt if we have an emotion, um, an emotion-less or not as emotion friendly as maybe we want workplace, we can start to disrupt that. And so we look at emotions and vulnerability first. And we do that exactly the why, as I talked about earlier, because if we can get ourselves in a place where we're better with emotions and better with vulnerability, more comfortable with that, then it's easier for us to show up for someone who is overwhelmed by emotion and feeling really vulnerable. So that's where we start. And some companies need a lot of help there. Some companies don't need very much help there because they already have a really rich system of support with emotions.
Yeah.
And then after that, we look sort of generally at some of the things we've talked about today, like what can you say? We could do some training about that, getting into talking about appropriate things for maybe different relationships within your business. And then what can we do? So really practical ways to offer support. And then we look at your unique business and how can you create a system like that menu I was talking about? What does your business's menu look like for someone who's grieving? Because it really
Yeah.
is dependent on the business. Every business has
Yeah.
different needs. And so how do we make sure the business's needs are being met
And at the
and we're
same time,
providing robust support to this griever, right? Because it's
yeah,
not an
yeah,
either or, it's a both and.
it's
So
a both.
how do we
Yeah.
set that up? And how do we start to talk about it in the workplace so that the onus isn't completely on the griever to have to come and advocate for themselves? Because that's a big ask of grievers too, to have to go in and speak the unspeakable. So I have to go into my boss or my supervisor and say again, the impossible thing to say in those early days is about the death of your person. Like saying to people over and over again, my son died, was just the most horrifying, awful
Yeah.
thing. So you have to say that, and then you have to say, and I'm really not feeling like myself, and I don't know what to do about work. And like it becomes this whole thing that you have to try and advocate for yourself. So if you could go in and you already knew there was this menu, there was this system of support for when you're struggling, and you could just go in and the conversation became, I need the menu, and what do I need this week? That's so much easier for everybody. And if everyone
Right.
knows that's there, then it's also more
Phenomenal.
comfortable for the
It's
supervisor,
very
right? Because you're
comfortable.
not
Yeah.
having to go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to
What
do. I
is
don't
it?
know how to support them. We've already talked about it. It's already there.
Yeah.
We've done,
So,
we've
so just
done
like any
workshops
other
and
policy,
yeah,
any other, human resource related stuff that we do in the organizations, this becomes a normal thing.
yeah, it's another version of a return to work policy. Like I say to
Right.
companies, if you have a return to work policy after injury or after illness, you
Yeah.
need a return to work policy for grievers.
Grievers.
And it's
Right.
not going to look
Yeah.
the same, but you're going to accommodate your people because these are your valuable team members. You're of
Yeah.
course going to accommodate them. You of course want to keep them. You of course want them to feel valued. You want them to
Yes.
stay. You want them to feel happy-ish as much as they can. You want them to feel valued and seen and
Right.
heard.
Right.
And so how do we set that up? So that's the last two steps is how do we do that for your staff? And then if you're a business that has customer facing, which we all do, we all have a customer, whether we're business to business or we're business to consumer. So how do you then, what supports can you provide for clients who are grieving
Or
or
the
customers who are
clients
grieving? Yeah.
grieving.
So we
Wow.
look at
That's
that part.
beautiful. That's
Yeah. So
beautiful.
it's really cohesive and, in depth, and we'll get to there. And it doesn't
Yeah.
need to feel, I hope people have heard today that conversations around grief don't have to feel hard. They don't have to
Yes.
feel heavy. They can just be honest and awkward, and that's brilliant.
Yeah.
There's brilliance there, right? And in our
Yeah.
ability to come together and share, we've all had losses, we've all experienced grief. And if we come together and put on the table, oh man, this would have really helped me, that's how we build really robust supports for people. It's by sharing what would have helped us or what we would have done had we known, right? There's gold there, right? As soon as you're
Right.
thinking, oh, wow, I could have done this or that or the other thing, that's how we start to put that together. So, and that's
Right.
a custom program that I do with businesses to help them.
Wow.
And I'm
Really,
happy to do
really
with
nice.
groups of entrepreneurs. If you're a one-off, solopreneur, then gather a group of solopreneurs and let's talk about how we build a community that can help each other.
Help each other. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Beautiful. So, all the listeners, just reach out to Susan if you have any sort of losses in your business, and it could be related to your business. It could be related to all the relationships that you have. It could be related to you as a person, as an individual as well. And that's so beautiful, Susan. I'm so glad that you showed up and took out this time. I know it's pretty late where you are. And
It is.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of the efforts and everything, and the wisdom that you shared with us. And I really feel the movement that you're building around grief is much needed. And it must reach out to as many people as possible so that we handle
Thank you.
ourselves better and people around us better. So thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Susan. Thank you so much for showing up. And I'll catch up with you later. Thank you.
Thank you so much.